around me, it doesn't take much to be a tech expert. So there's a little bar to clear, but I know Marcy has a better understanding of all that than I do. Well, welcome all. Glad to have you all with us today. As a reminder, we're finishing up our sermon series on a few points of Calvinism. And this week we are looking at the perseverance of the saints. So the end of our acronym TULIP, if you've been following along. Just some programming notes. On Sunday, instead of meeting outside and dodging leaves and the cool weather, we're going to be moving inside, which we're going to be doing that by taking an abundance of precaution and a lot of different ways of doing that. But essentially, for those who would like to worship with us, we will have our 9:30 and 11:15 services like we used to, but they will look a little different in that the 9:30 will be in the sanctuary, the 11:15 will be here in Fellowship Hall, as they have been, but they're not going to be different services. We previously had contemporary and traditional. This is just a way for us, because we're going to limit the number of people to 50 people in each place. So this just allows us to have two services instead of broadcasting the service on the screen as it goes on. We just thought, oh, we'll just do two services. So here, this week and going forward, you can call the office and reserve a spot in worship. You just tell Kim which service you'd like to come to. And we'll have things socially distanced. So here in Fellowship Hall, we'll have seats set up. You know, if a family of four reserves a spot, we'll have 4 seats together. If a single person reserves a spot, we'll have a single seat. They'll be distanced out so that we can be together and worship. In the sanctuary, we'll simply have some pews roped off and kind of different places to be. So we have a lot of other information. If you didn't get the newsletter, it's available on your way out. This morning, right before the exit doors on the left, there's little pockets with the newsletters that has a lot of information about restarting. But just some programming notes as we get back to worship inside. And we'll hope that that works well over the next few weeks. I'm really hoping that we'll have a solid understanding of how that's working, so that as we go into December, we'll be able to make decisions on how many services we might need and those kind of things. But the 50-person limit, I don't think is going to change anytime soon. But we think that we have a pretty good handle on how to accomplish that as safely as possible. So we begin this morning with our question for discussion. Define what it means, what you think it means to be a saint. Do you or we even believe in saints? And what do you know of different Christian traditions and different saint definitions? So what's a saint? And do you, in your Christian belief, believe in saints? How do you believe of saints differ?
I think in my perspective, to kind of answer your second question first, I think the definition of saints kind of is more of a human thing. I'm not sure there's anything, or I haven't read everything, but maybe there is something in the Bible that says a saint is this. So I think it's more of a human definition.
So a saint is a human, it's more of a human definition, not like a biblical definition in your perspective.
In my perspective.
Yeah, I don't think I believe in saints.
You don't think you believe in saints, Joyce?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I see the concept, but.
Well, what's the concept to you? What's the concept of a saint to you?
Well,
Is it an earthly person? Is it a heavenly being?
when I think about it, I think it's like an earthly person who maybe has inside track on God. You know what I'm saying?
Earthly person with an inside track to God is
But I don't know that I believe.
so that's how you define it, but you don't necessarily believe it. Okay, yeah, that's actually fair. That actually is logical when you lay down. Yeah, no.
I don't know where in the Bible I read this, but I always believe that we who follow Jesus, who accept him, are saints. And I think I've seen references in the Bible where I can hear.
So we who follow Jesus are are saints. So it's a pretty simple, and I don't mean to be, I don't mean that as a criticism, but kind of a pretty basic definition. Those who follow Jesus considered saints.
I also think of the great cloud of witnesses from Hebrews. There's this like sense of a community of people who are supporting us, and who we can look to as well, and as a way to, remind us how do we live, how do we act out our faith.
So Marcy brings up the great cloud of witnesses, this kind of Hebrew kind of feel about that. Marcy, for you, is the great cloud of witnesses people who've come before us, or do they surround us now?
Yes.
Yes. Good answer. Smart one here. She took the Porter seminary classes.
Yes. Bible study 101.
And it reminds me of the hymn, "For all the saints." It sounds like that.
For all the saints, Jimmy says. So kind of a grander conception. So you'll have to excuse me, for whatever reason, this mask tickles my nose very badly. So I'm going to keep adjusting that. That's the danger of having a beard behind a mask, because the facial hair keeps coming back at you. So I think in our tradition, interestingly, our Baptist visitor got the Reformed definition pretty well set. Bill says pretty much anyone who follows Jesus. I think that's kind of, Rick, going back to your point too, almost a biblical definition, because we see talk about addresses to communities, to all the saints in so-and-so. And when people write to others, they're not talking about the people who've been canonized by the Catholic Church because of miracles attested to them. They're saying to all the believers. So while the Catholic Church has, and I think the Orthodox Church too, and other traditions have kind of certain steps for saints to be canonized, to become an official saint. So Joyce, going back to your definition, kind of somebody who lives a life that kind of has an inside track to God, we'll say, whose holiness is kind of demonstrated. That's one definition of a saint. It's a very particular one, though. Whereas in the Reformed tradition, and Protestant tradition, and broader Christian tradition, and in biblical tradition, I think, the saints tend to be the body of believers. So when I try and explain it to children who get confused, I just say, well, it's somebody who we can look to as a good example of faith. They can be present, they can be past, those kind of things. So Jenny, as you say, for all the saints, when we think about this Sunday, we'll be hearing for all the saints on All Saints Sunday. It's kind of a cloud of witnesses, past and present, yes, as Pastor Marcy says. So that idea that there's no particular right answer on that, I want you to know. And if you have Catholic and Orthodox friends who say, well, this is what a saint is, and that's the definition, it's not worth arguing about. That's fine. Different traditions have different understandings. But in kind of the traditional understanding is a more broad definition of who saints are.
And I also think, like, in Catholic traditions, there's this concept of praying to saints and having them be kind of this intercessors in to Jesus. So
that's interesting. So Pastor Marcy talks about in Catholic tradition, a tradition of praying to saints. I think depending on the person you talk to, they'll either tell you, yes, they do that as intercessors, or they say, no, we pray through saints. So but it's kind of picking nits. It's kind of the same thing, right? But the idea that it would be good to, anytime somebody says they pray to a certain saint, it would be good to say, no, you're praying. It's kind of like delivering a letter to God, and you're like, well, I'm not anywhere close, but I know St. Peter is a little closer than me. So I'm going to take my prayer to St. Peter, who's more accessible, because St. Peter was a human. And just going to say, hey, St. Peter, could you deliver this to God for me? Could you intercess on my behalf? And that makes it logical why you would pray through saints as intercessors, right? Because they're people that seem a little more accessible to us. But it reestablishes an ancient Hebrew function too, which the Catholic tradition, the Orthodox tradition have a lot more structured. It's the priestly tradition, meaning that you have to have a mediator or intercessor between you and God, which in the general Protestant tradition, we seem to kind of abolish that. We say that we have more direct access to God. So the saint's function in our tradition is more of an influence on us, whereas in some traditions, the saint's function is a mediator or an intercessor between us and God. So that's an important difference, to be honest, is not who they are, but what they are is important to understand. Yes, Jenny?
I think we should bring in for Catholics, Mary, the Mother of God. She was one of the chief and one of the big intercessors for.
So right, Mary is the chief among the saints as the Mother of God, and right. So they have a specific prayer. Hail Mary is a prayer for Mary to intercess. So sometimes people get confused from the outside saying you're praying to Mary. Praying through Mary is a better understanding of how that goes. Okay. So we're going to start as we look at Romans 8 by turning to the Psalms, as everyone does. We're going to look at Psalm 44. So if you, hopefully you all have a Bible. Psalm 44 is a little lengthy, and we're going to read it to get an overview of it. We're not going to dissect Psalm 44 tonight. We just want to get the general view. So as it is read, even if you can't hear every word that's being heard, if you follow along your own reading of Psalm 44, it'll help us understand the general overview of Psalm 44, not the particulars. So, do we have a volunteer who might be willing to read through verse 8? We'll go Rick, and then Jane, I'll ask you next. But Rick, you can start.
We have heard with our ears, O God. Our fathers have told us what you did in their days, in days long ago. With your hand you drove out the nations and planted our fathers. You crushed the peoples and made our fathers flourish. It was not by their sword that they won the land, nor did their arm bring them victory. It was your right hand, your arm, and the light of your face for who you love them. You are my king and my God, who decrees victories for Jacob. Through you we push back our enemies. Through your name we trample our foes. I do not trust in my bow. My sword does not bring me victory. But you give us victory over our enemies. You put our adversaries to shame. In God we make our boast all day long, and we will praise your name forever.
So if we stop right there, we have a certain understanding of what the author is going for in this hymn. But then we continue. So Jane, would you read 9 to 16 for us?
But now you have rejected and humbled us. You no longer go out with our armies. You made us retreat before the enemy, and our adversaries have plundered us. You gave us up to be devoured like sheep, and have scattered us among the nations. You sold your people for a pittance, gaining nothing from their sale. You have made us a reproach to our neighbors, a scorn and derision of those around us. You have made us a byword among the nations. The people shake their heads at us. I live in disgrace all day long, and my face is covered with shame.
One more.
At the taunts of those who reproach and revile me, because of the enemy who is bent on revenge.
All of a sudden, the tone has shifted a little bit here. I'm going to read the final few verses, 17 through 26. All this has come upon us, yet we have not forgotten you or been false to your covenant. Our heart has not turned back, nor have our steps departed from your way. Yet you have broken us in the haunt of jackals and covered us with deep darkness. If we had forgotten the name of our God or spread out our hands to a strange God, would not God discover this? For he knows the secrets of the heart. Because of you, we're being killed all day long and accounted as sheep for the slaughter. Rouse yourself. Why do you sleep, O Lord? Awake, do not cast us off forever. Why do you hide your face? Why do you forget our affliction and oppression? For we sink down to the dust, our bodies cling to the ground. Rise up, come to our help. Redeem us for the sake of your steadfast love. So as we read the complete Psalm 44, what do you get? What's the tone of this psalm? Overall, what seems to be the author's motivation or tone?
Almost desperation.
Almost desperation. There seems to be kind of a desperation. Based on what brings the desperation?
Well, in the early verses, it was like everything's going well, we're beating our enemies as you instructed us to do. And then all of a sudden the tide turns and their enemies are defeating them. And so it seems like God has abandoned them.
Early on, we have a history of being with God. God gives us victory, but all of a sudden it seems like now we're losing and God left us.
The writer is angry.
What's that?
The writer is angry.
The writer is angry.
The writer's angry. Sorry, Bill, I was a little hard of hearing. The writer's angry. The writer's angry. Absolutely.
And I would that angry with God, there's like a sense of like,
Specifically with God.
Yeah.
Not just angry in general, but with God. Right. Hey, this desertion kind of, this idea goes back to it.
In another group, we were discussing whether we are allowed to be angry with God. And this seems to affirm that
The
God.
question of whether you're allowed to be angry with God, the Psalms are full of it. You are, and that's what, Ginny, this is a good and important point for us, just in general as believers. I have people that I counsel, for 15 years I've counseled people who feel guilty about having doubts and being angry with God. And when I first got into ministry, I have to say the most appealing passages in Scripture were the narrative passages, the stories, the Gospels. But as one matures and deals with your own faith and the faith of others, you understand why the Psalms are so important to so many. Because they allow us to see that believers have had doubts and have been angry with God since the beginning. That's part of being in relationship with God. And it's okay. It gives us permission to express that too. That's not weakness, that's a part of being a believer. Sometimes you get frustrated, sometimes you get angry, and sometimes you have doubts. Where are you, God, in all of this? That it's not a weakness in our faith. Because otherwise it would have never made it in the Bible. It's in the Psalms. These things are in the Psalms. They give us words to express our fears, our doubts, and our anger too, when we get around to it. So think about what kind of situation would produce a psalm like this one. Share some potential real-life situations that would prompt it. Maybe back then or today. So we know the Psalms were written, some traditions say King David wrote them all. That's almost certainly not the case, because there's some that were dedicated to different people, not just David. But David may have written some. More likely he was the one who was the, I just had the word. He was the king, and these were the artists in his court. So the poets, so they were dedicated to King David. So whether or not he wrote them or they were dedicated to him, it's not really all that important to us because they still are really important as far as what happens. But these date back, all to say, these date back to about 800 years before Jesus, the historical period of the Psalms. But what would it take for somebody to write a song like this back then or today?
Well, I think that today, when you see injustices and things that are happening, you have to question God and why this is being allowed.
So today, if you see injustices and things that are happening that don't make sense, it might lead you to question God.
I mean, I think of just COVID-19.
COVID-19. Why are you forsaking us all of a sudden?
Why do you sleep, oh Lord?
Yeah.
Like, there's just.
And it's worldwide. There's
Yeah.
no country that can say, yeah, but we're the ones who are followers of God here and we're doing fine. Like, no, this is worldwide, right? So, one verse here that was really interesting, I think, verse 17, all of this has come upon us, yet we have not forgotten you or been false to your covenant. There's a lot in the Old Testament especially where there's a covenant of, if you be my people, I will be your God, that kind of thing. And one side, the people usually violate the covenant. The author here is saying, we're still good. Like, we're doing exactly what we're supposed to, and you're not here. So, like, this psalm expresses, whether it's accurate or not, the author is expressing, it's not because we've been unfaithful. So there's not a good reason for it. Whereas a lot of times, the prophets come about and say, well, the reason this is happening, king, is because you're being unfaithful. You're worshiping another God. The author is saying, we're not being unfaithful. And yet, our military victories have turned to defeat. And our enemies seem to be able to win the day now. So this is a much different set of circumstances than we're used to. And that's why I think this psalm is really interesting because it applies to us today in some ways when we feel like we're doing things the way we're supposed to and it still doesn't work out.
Well, even in.
Chris, when going, yeah, I'm sorry, I have, can you hear me? Because I
Yeah, go ahead.
hear you. Okay, that, I think back on verse 8, based on what you're just talking about, in God we have boasted continually, is what my Bible says, and we will give thanks in your name forever. But that's almost a contradiction in my mind. And then it goes on, this doom and gloom, but we've been busy boasting about you forever, God. How dare you do anything negative to us?
So we've been boasting about God continually and we deserve to be treated well, kind of, right? So yeah, that we could see that as being, but that being, I would argue too, though, that's part of the covenant. Like they're boasting, we have a God, it is the Lord, they're kind of supposed to boast about the Lord. And that's why they kind of figure, why isn't this working out? But you're right, it is kind of well, we held up our end of the bargain, so where are you now?
Yeah, and since
Go, one second, Mom. Joyce, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking that even you can get angry, you get angry with God because even in this situation, especially COVID, we're being kept from God. I mean, we're being kept from God, like we're not able to assemble, we're not able to have the fellowship that maybe we need as a Christian community, and so it's almost an affront to us.
So especially with COVID, Joyce is saying it feels as if like we're being separated from God because of the inability to fellowship and join together the way we normally would. It seems kind of like feeling like our enemies are winning, even though there's no particular enemy but a virus right now. It seems like we're being held down or punished in some way, right? Yeah. So I'm just gonna check the mic here real quick. Does it seem like
I'm
We
having
didn't get a great
trouble.
volume here.
The sound system is, I don't know if Carol Jean is having trouble with her sound system, but I'm getting a lot of just just noisy sound.
Well, we're not hearing you as well as we normally do today, but we'll keep trying.
Wow.
So we're going to move on to Romans 8, and we're going to read the beginning of our passage from Romans 8. Now, if you were with us 2 weeks ago, when we tackled limited atonement, you'll remember that we read the verses right before this, the preceding verses. And as I looked at that, I purposefully stopped at verse 30. Because from 31 to 39, I thought, oh, we got to save that for a couple weeks from now, because that'll be a good topic for us then. So I'd like us to start by reading verse 31 through 35. Would somebody be willing, Steve, you volunteered before, would you be willing to read verse 31 through 35 in chapter 8 of Romans?
What can we say about such wonderful things as these? God is for us. Who can ever be against us? Since God did not spare even his own son, but gave him up for us all, won't God, who gave us Christ, also give us everything else? Who dares accuse us whom God has chosen for his own? Will God? No. He is the one who has given us right standing with himself. Who then will condemn us? Will Jesus Christ? No. For he is the one who died for us, who was raised to life for us, and is sitting at the place of highest honor next to God, pleading for us. Can anything ever separate us from Christ's love? Does it mean he no longer loves us if we have trouble or calamity, or are persecuted, or are hungry, or cold, or in danger, or threatened with death?
Thanks, Steve. So again, verse 31 through 35, if you couldn't hear that particularly, hopefully you were reading along. In these verses, what are Paul's, perhaps rhetorical, I wrote 7 questions. I was able to find 7 questions, but it doesn't matter the particular number. But what are some of the questions that Paul asks?
If God is for us, who can be against us?
If God is for us, who can be against us? Now, some scholars say that Paul actually was writing a statement followed by a question. That's probably not likely, but then it would read, God is for us. So then who's against us? Either way, it's kind of an if-then. If God's for us, who can be against us? That's a big one.
Who is to condemn?
Who is to condemn? It's God who justifies, which we learned about just before. You know, God predestines and justifies and glorifies and all that good stuff. If it's God who justifies, who condemns? Who can condemn if God's the one justifying?
Who can separate us from the love of Christ?
Who can separate? Who will, verse 35, who will separate us from the love of Christ? So verse 34 ends with, it's Christ Jesus who died, yes, who was raised, who's the right hand of God, who indeed intercedes for us. So who will separate us from the love of Christ? And then it follows there too. So just a note about that second part of verse 34. Anybody who ever memorized the Apostles' Creed?
Yeah.
What happens after Jesus sitteth on the right hand of God the Father Almighty?
Judge those, the quick and the dead.
He will judge the quick and the dead. Quick meaning alive, not any aspect of our speed. So Jesus sits at the right hand of the Father to judge. What does verse 34 say?
When you talk about a single verse, can you read it and say?
Yeah, right. Sorry, Jimmy, you have a different translation. Who is to condemn? If it is Christ Jesus who died, yes, who was raised, who's at the right hand of God, we've got that all in our creed, who indeed intercedes for us. Intercedes is different than judges. Judges has a connotation of, Jesus is the prosecutor. Here, Jesus is the intercessor. He's the defense attorney. It's a very different understanding of what Jesus' purpose is in heaven. But that's what allows Paul to say this. Because he's saying if Jesus is interceding for us, which he makes that statement directly, he's not saying he's not wondering if that's true. If that's the case, then all these other things too. Right?
But, I'm sorry, I'm struggling with the Trinity. But they really are all one.
No, Joyce, this is right. So Joyce brings up the concept of the Trinity and how they are still all one. Yes, they are, and God in three persons, blessed Trinity, as the hymn goes, right? So God the Father and the Son operate in this co-eternal kind of reign with the Holy Spirit, continuing to somehow interact with all of us too, and do these things. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Well, maybe it's like a woman who has a job and that's this, and then she has a family and that's this, but yet they're all,
And she has her own person too, outside the job and the family too,
so
right?
they're
Yeah.
all the same.
Same person, different roles, right? Maybe that's a way to think about it. Yeah. So, but Jesus being part of the divine, but being the ultimate intercessor on our behalf, this kind of thing. So, and before we move forward, just one thing too. Verse 32. He who did not withhold his own son, but also gave him up for all of us, will he not with him also give us everything else? So I'm going to read this part, and I want to see if it rings any bells for you. You did not withhold your own son, but gave him up. Does that bring to mind any particular story in the Bible not related to Jesus?
Abraham and Isaac?
Abraham and Isaac.
That's
God calls Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Abraham's going to do it. And God says, you've proven your faith. You did not withhold even your own son. Paul says, go ahead, Marcy.
Oh, I was just also thinking of the story of Hannah.
Hannah dedicating her son,
Dedicating her son.
who
even though
she
didn't
wished
get
for
it.
forever, and finally has a son, and she dedicates him to the Lord. But this idea that Abraham's proven a man of God, and God blesses him for being willing to sacrifice even Isaac. And here Paul reverses it, saying, look, God sacrificed his son for us to prove God's love and faithfulness to us. It's a reversal of the story of Abraham and Isaac, which is pretty incredible if you think about it. One is trying to prove faith to God, and now at the end of this story, God's proving God's faith in us. So Paul raises all these questions. What's his point in raising them?
I think just trying to confirm that God is with us, always has been, and always will be.
Paul is saying God is faithful to us. Look at all these things. If God is for us, who can be against us? If God acquits us, who can find us guilty? It's almost like Paul is trying to make us an argument to not believe ourselves, but to believe God. You know, how many times do we find ourselves guilty of something? Paul's saying, if God doesn't find you guilty, if God is gracious, how come you're the one keeping your own self? How come you're not forgiving someone else? God's forgiving you. How can you not forgive someone else? Paul is basically kind of making an appeal to us in our faith to say, you need to understand this. If God does these things, how can we not? I'm going to read Romans chapter 8, verse 36 through 39. As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all day long. We are accounted as sheep to be slaughtered. Knowing all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convicted that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all of creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. So what's Paul's purpose in quoting Psalm 44:22 in our verse 36? Or you might ask, what was the reason Pastor Chris had us read Psalm 44 before we started this study?
I think the psalmist is trying to tell us that even when we are at our lowest point in life, or almost not living, God is still with us, and we can still call upon God to be faithful.
So the psalmist is telling us, even at our lowest point, no matter how angry we are, God is still there. We can still call upon God, even in anger and death. And Paul takes that one step further to say nothing can separate you from God. Even were you to be in the condition of the psalmist when Psalm 44 was written, even if you were suffering military defeat and humiliation from your enemies, none of that can separate you from God. So how does his message in verse 37 through 39 sum up Paul's message overall? Think about what came before this too, maybe, in the chapter.
I guess thinking about the passage beforehand, thinking it's like, once God has got you, God's got you. Like, there is nothing that will be able to separate us from that love. No action or inaction, death, like, nothing will be able to separate us. It's kind of just this idea that, like, looking at before, like the beginning of Romans 8, it's just like, once God has you, God's got you. We can have faith in that. We can trust that.
Looking at Romans 8, the beginning of that, once God's got you, God has you. We can trust that. It's sure. Yes, Jimmy?
This is frequently read in memorial services and funerals.
Frequently read at memorial services and funerals, Jimmy says.
One of the statements is because nothing living or dead, angelic or demonic, is frequently read in memorial services and funerals. I know because I've played the organ at about 50 of them, and I've heard that over and over.
So yeah, Jenny talking about being an organist at a lot of these services, you do hear this, and it's a passage of comfort to say that nothing in life or death can separate us from God's love through Jesus Christ.
But there are people though who find Christ and then turn away from him. Am I wrong?
So
Even though they turn away, God has them and he'll never let them go.
So Steve, you just anticipated question number 9, which is the whole point of the whole passage. Usually Chris Allgaier does this, but thank you for being her spot today. There are some people who seem to fall out of belief. And that's really what Paul is addressing and why it's important for us today. It's not just the cosmic, but the day-to-day. What the psalmist expresses. Listen, I'm ashamed, and my enemies keep winning. I'm not sure that God is really there anymore. So I'm not sure I really believe this stuff. Right? My life has taken a turn. I'm not sure that I believe in God's presence in my life. So Paul's saying, Paul doesn't tell us, once you're saved, you're always saved. But he eliminates every potential reason for you to drift away from God. He says, heights, nor depths, nor powers, nor rulers, nor famine, nor the sword, nothing can separate us from God's love. Does that mean does that mean it's a fallacy to think that some people stop believing in God? No. I think there are some people who turn away from their faith in their life through different things that happen, right? Paul is saying, you may do that, but God doesn't do that. God keeps believing in you, even if you are finding it hard to believe in God. And then Paul would go on to say, and nothing that happens to you can separate you from God's love. So you should make sure you believe that. So Paul would say that Paul would probably argue, Steve, that it's impossible to fall out of belief. Because how can you if you know that God is with you no matter what happens to you? Well, yeah, good argument, Paul, but real life says that sometimes it's just too overwhelming and you start to wonder why, right? And Paul just keeps saying, nothing can separate us. So he in essence makes the argument that no matter what happens to us in life or death, that once we are believers, once we are saints, we are always saints. That we don't become unsaintly, because God's love is always there, and nothing can separate us from that love. Even if maybe we drift away at some points in our lives, this seems to say that God continues to embrace us no matter what.
So does that mean someone like me, who, is a great doubter?
The great doubter, you expose yourself, okay?
Even though on a regular basis, I'm like, is this really real? That because at times, well, I go back and I keep going back and trying to figure it out that I'm safe, you know what I'm saying?
So going back to wonder, are you saved? Meaning salvation-wise, Grace? Yeah. So when you have your doubts, does that somehow...
Like, I doubt every day.
Right.
I doubt maybe 10 times a day. And is that normal? No.
Yeah, I think it's normal.
Joyce says she doubts at least 10 times a day. Is that normal? I would say, Joyce, that for certain people it is. Some people don't examine their faith that often, to be quite honest.
Well, see, I talk to God all the time, but I tell him, I'm like, are you really here? You know, I mean, is this
So you're a Psalm
something-
44 type person, Joyce.
Is this
That's what
something
we get.
that somebody made up a long time ago? You know, it's kind of embarrassing when you hear your Bible study things that you don't know. But I want to believe, but sometimes it's difficult.
I want to believe, but sometimes it's difficult.
Sounds like a person of faith.
Yeah, I think, Joyce, that is like a great mark of faith. I agree with Pastor Marcy that the idea that, again, it goes back to saying, you know, the psalmists were all about expressing doubt and expressing anger. And that tells me those are credible and almost valued parts of faith, is to not know, to not understand. And frankly, I think it helps us to understand who we are versus who God is when we consider, like, God's ways are not our ways. So how can we live life without any doubt or without any questions? If God was easy to figure out, we would have figured God out, right? But there's a reason why the Hebrews, since the time of Egypt all the way through modern Christians today, still ask questions. What the heck is going on And the way that I expressed it to somebody yesterday, I'm not sure this is a great illustration, but it's one I went with. I said, the sidewalk out front of our church continues to exist, whether or not you use it or believe it's there. It is the path to God. Whether or not you use it or believe it's there, it doesn't cease to exist. And so there are times when we say, oh, look, there's a sidewalk. I will use that sidewalk, and it will help me get where I want to go. Sometimes we look at that sidewalk and say, there's a sidewalk. I'm going to use it to get away from the place where I was. Right? So I think that the idea that no matter what, I think Paul is saying, no matter our doubts or our experiences, God's love is still there. And nothing can separate that from us. The sidewalk analogy falls short in that it's passive. Right? It exists no matter if you want it or not. Paul is saying it pursues you. Paul is kind of using the same kind of idea as Psalm 23, like, the love of God pursues me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forevermore. It's an active kind of love that, like Pastor Marcy was saying, it goes, once God gets you, God gets you. And it's not that means it converts your heart to where you never have a doubt again. It's just that through all those doubts, it's not going to impact how much God loves you. That God's love is sure through all of your doubts.
And honestly, Joyce, I think for me, I'd rather have someone have a lot of questions than be very certain about, well, this is just black and white. This is exactly how it is. I'd rather have someone who is like, I have questions, and I have,
I see a lot of people who,
yeah,
they don't seem to have any doubts. You know what I mean? Like of course, I was raised in a Christian, Methodist church, but people who were like grounded in the church, from day one, and they just seem to just absorb it. And whereas I've taken the other way, I'm thinking.
So you see the model of people who don't have doubts. So Joyce, to me, when I see someone who doesn't have doubts, I see either someone who's hiding them or someone who's not examining them. Because when you're confronted with issues like we see around us today, you have to have doubts and questions. And if you don't, it's just because you buried them and said, oh, I don't want to ask those questions. Those shouldn't be asked in polite company. And God is polite company, so I won't ask God any of those questions. I'm not saying indulge your doubts and indulge your but I don't. I think anybody who tells me they've never had it. I met a couple. They celebrated their 50th anniversary. My mother would know them. They were parts of our church. She still is part of the church. And on their 50th anniversary, they said, we've never had a fight in all of our marriage. I said, have you ever lived together?
The saying, if you've never had a fight in your marriage, what if you was dead?
What if he was dead? Yeah, we've never had a fight. What if he was dead? Yeah. So we've never had a disagreement in all of our marriage. Well, somebody must have swallowed a lot of disagreements over the years. Somebody must have just buried those feelings down inside you. It's not that couples should fight. It's just that in any relationship, there's gotta be doubts and gives and takes. They don't have to be big blowouts, but they're never a disagreement. That must just be somebody who just rolls over every time and says, okay, yes, dear, yes, dear, yes, dear. No, there's got to be some times where in relationships we have differences of opinion. So how could that not be part of our relationship with God? It's logical. It makes a lot of sense. It's everything about us that we know. The people we love the most, sometimes they're the ones that get us fuming. How can you do that? I don't understand that. What? No. What about me? All those things.
It was God who sort of established the idea of having a relationship which is quite human with us. So he is the one who established that. It's the story.
God has established a relationship with us almost on human terms, and with the coming of Christ, in fact, on human terms, to try and tell us that these relationships are important. And if we understand that, then we understand our relationship with God also kind of reflects the way that our relationships go with other people. And that's not to diminish our relationships with God, nor is it to make our relationships with people holy. You could do a little of either, but the idea being that this is how we are in community. Yes, we wish we always had trust, but there's not always that. But Paul continues to bring forth that nothing that happens in our lives or to us personally or in our world, now or to come. So the very earthy stuff or the cosmic stuff, nothing can separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ, which is a bold declaration, and one that takes away all that fear-mongering of, well, you better live a straight life, otherwise God might zap you after God embraced you, because God's fickle. No, God's not fickle. God is a prodigal God. We talk about the story of the prodigal son. The son went and wasted all the stuff his father gave him. God wastes God's love on us all the time when we don't deserve it. It happens over and over and will forevermore. Paul says it so. And Jesus says it so. I mean, Jesus came to show us that. So, all this idea that Paul rules out all of these things that could lead us to turning away from God. You know, the sword and famine or peril or nakedness or persecution in verse 35. And he says none of these things can separate us from the love of God. From our standpoint, maybe they bring us doubts and questions. From Paul saying, from God's standpoint, none of that can separate us from God. And if God won't be separated from us, then like it or not, we're stuck with God, which is a pretty comforting thing to think about. It doesn't eliminate our doubts or questions, so don't hear the pastor saying that to be a good Christian, no doubts or questions, not at all. But it does give us that hope, that line, that thread. In all of this, somehow God is still going to be loving, even though my enemies are rising up against me in Psalm 44. But interesting, Psalm 44 starts with the tone of, in the past you've been faithful, and it ends with the word steadfast love. So there's a seeking of God's steadfast love, even in Psalm 44, which expresses a whole lot of doubt. The psalmist writes it knowing that God is still present somehow, but just what the heck are you doing, God? Get up and help us. So as we depart today, I leave you with a question for reflection. So proceeding 2 weeks ago, we know that God makes everything work for good. We talked about that, cosmic good, right? With that said, what are some of the things that seem to be able to not be good, that separate us from God? So I can claim as a Christian, all things work together for good for those who believe. But I also know there's some things that don't seem to be very good, that separate us from God. So what today do you think gets in the way of faith or belief? Paul talks about famine and persecution or the sword. And I said, please try and consider a world perspective and separate this answer from a late October in an election year in the U.S. So what gets in the way of faith or belief? If your answer is Republicans or Democrats, you answered wrong. There's a lot of good answers, those aren't good ones. So, but think about what seems to get in the way of feeling that love of Christ today. What are the things that as you look at it, that you say, but why does that happen? So of the list in verses 38 through 39, what seems to be the most difficult to overcome in general these days? Rulers or powers, principalities, angels. And of those things, which is the one that most takes your focus away from God? I wouldn't even just limit it to those things. I would say of the things that separate you from God, that not in a way that make you doubt God even. What are the things that most distract you from God's love today in your own life? So that's a point to ponder, something to think about. For some people, it'll be money. For others, it'll be the opinion of others, how they're perceived by others. what are the things that you feel distance you most from God, that make you bring your focus away from God's love for you in the most, not in a societal way, but in a very personal way that you know you're distracted? So thank you all for joining us once again today. We're glad to, we've tackled Romans 8 and 9 over the last 3 weeks. So that's been some big, you need a big shovel to dig through those chapters. So thanks for joining with us in that. And next week, we'll begin a 3-week we're going to look at stewardship. But within that, we're also going to look at creation care. So it's the stewardship season for the church, but we're also going to be talking about stewardship of creation. And we're going to spend a week with a forest theme, a week with a land theme, and a week with a river theme over the next 3 weeks as we talk about stewardship. So we'll have some interesting passages that'll have to do with creation over the next few weeks. So thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Peace be with you as we depart.
Bye.
See you tomorrow night.